Hello and welcome back for another podcast episode of Aceto Magazine. My name is Emir Şentürk, founder of Aceto Magazine and host of this show. I'm glad to have you back because today again I'm going to discuss a very interesting topic because I'm going through the concepts of capitalism and communism, talking about some general themes and ideas around those very interesting and also polarizing concepts that we are actually engaging with and affected by on a daily basis. I would like to start off, before I go into the details of this discussion, I would like to start off once again presenting my book. It's called DEVLET. DEVLET is a new state theory. It is a concept of how to structure a state, how to build up a political system that is actually functioning and less likely to become dysfunctional if properly built up and applied, or if the principles in here are applied properly. You might have noticed that under every episode I'm putting a link of this book down there because you might want to have a look at it. And economic policy, which is the topic of today's episode, is also very prominent in this book. So here in this book, I'm not going to talk about differences between communism and capitalism, but rather establishing a whole new economic system, but basically based on some very central capitalist themes. This is not to say that I'm going to be biased in this discussion, but I'm just going to walk you through some structural strengths and weaknesses and just some structural situations that exist between the capitalist and communist ideas, right? And here we are with the first point. I have my little wise notebook with me, so I can walk you through it more thoroughly. And the main thing that most people mix up with capitalism and communism is that today we think that these are ideas or ideologies even, which they are not. These are both economic concepts or economic ideas. So the founder of communism, or the one who actually brought this whole idea of the common good and shared productivity into the economic realm or into the political realm, was Karl Marx. And Karl Marx was an economist. Most people don't know that. It's very interesting. Oftentimes when I talk about political concepts, people think that Karl Marx was some sort of a revolutionary protester or something like that, but he was just an economist. And this is very interesting because the main ideas of capitalism and communism are really just, in essence, tied to the idea and to the usage of money. Meaning, capitalism firmly believes that the markets regulate themselves, meaning that through the vehicle of money, economic conduct and also kind of value creation is represented through the exchange of money. Meaning, obviously, first of all, money was introduced to facilitate trade, because if we want to trade goods one-on-one, there's not such a very solid frame of reference to say how much value is attached to a certain good. I could trade 3 eggs for a cow. I could trade 10 eggs for a cow. I could exchange 10 kilograms of steel in exchange for whatever good. And this pretty much depends on the terms that you make up with your trading partner, right? This makes it very difficult because the trading partner might not get this good of a quota in his next trade with another producer of goods or provider of services. So money kind of creates the common or some sort of abstracted value that is a more solid frame of reference for valuation. The problem is money is actually so efficient in doing that it also reveals some certain structural deficiencies of our human nature. And this is where communism comes in, because when trade was not regulated and people understood, or those people who understood how money is actually also representing our human nature and how we behave within larger groups and among ourselves, they became increasingly successful in accumulating money. And then they became what in communist terms is called the means of reproduction. Because with more money, they had a chance to reinvest the money into creating more capabilities of production, using human capital from people who don't have the means, and then their value or wealth expansion was kind of exponential, while the other one was more or less linear, depending on how they were using money in the end. And from that, the idea of social injustice kind of emerged in economic terms, and communism tried to address that. Meaning, if we just want to summarize it, capitalism, or the capitalist economic idea, is that money in itself, as an abstraction of value, or kind of facilitating trade through the abstraction of value of goods and services, regulates in an efficient way how we behave and maximize our well-being through the exchange of goods and services. Communism, on the other side, believes that there should be an overarching force, meaning the state in this case, should seek to equally distribute money and wealth within the society in order to flatten out the social injustices and discrepancies. So from that point on, I just touched upon why money is actually a useful tool and why capitalism has a point, but I want to elaborate on that and go into the advantages of capitalist thinking or capitalist systems. It needs, you can kind of outsource the property rights and the oversight measures that were implemented before the emergence of kind of the free market economy as we know it today. Because before that, landowners, they needed to exert much pressure and high control over their lands and over the goods and products that were kind of grew out of those lands and the productive facilities that actually created those products. So they outsourced it to money and people with the property rights, as property rights is an essential prerequisite for the unregulated exchange of money and goods and services on the market. They could efficiently do it by themselves, and the taxation that resulted from that was much more efficient than the landowners going to, let's say, to those who are working the land in what way ever. You can, for example, think about agrarian goods, but you can also think about a landowner who has some sort of productive facilities there and people operate them. It made it much more efficient for them to kind of collect money through taxes, through taxation, but also increased the amount that they could gather, because the whole process became more efficient as people among themselves, try to exceed their prior monetary performance, right? And they could do so because taxation is just a percentage, right? Whereas collecting duties were mostly like absolute numbers, so regardless of how much they worked, it remained mostly the same. And I'm just talking about rural Europe, where the idea actually of capitalism later on emerged in the current form and was developed into it. Now, communism in the industrial age emerged because once the big factories and the mass production started to set in, the workers were actually bound to this source of income, because all the other productive income possibilities were either not effective in generating enough money for them to make a living, or if they were already in the urban areas of whatever country we are talking about, there were actually no other possibilities to earn money than to go to work in factories. And because of that, because of this dependency, the wages were quite low, the living standard was horrible, and they couldn't get out of it because there weren't any possibilities to save money and invest it and also generate wealth. So the factory owners and operators, they gained massive amounts of wealth, and then they reinvested it into new productive facilities, hired more workers who couldn't save money and kind of build up their own wealth. And what happened is that the social injustice grew and grew and grew. So people felt miserable and couldn't kind of get out of this cycle of death. So communism tried to address that, and I think it's very noble to think about flattening out social injustice, and there's also very good idea in principle. But the way communism did this was not in a very efficient way. Communism is a reactive idea or a reactive development, and not a proactive development, and even less so a structural solution to the problems of capitalism. Because if you just want to break it down to very simple terms, communism means we have point A. This is the social injustice that we have that emerged through first wave industrialization and capitalism. And they crafted a solution, a very simple solution, with point B, right? Because they thought, this is the situation A, it's not working, so we have to create a whole new situation where this is going to work. The answer was building a system where wealth is centrally distributed, and we can see this in the communist revolution in Russia, where they were able to establish the first communist state, and then centrally manage who gets what and when and on what terms, right? So this is a cut. So this is a very simplistic thinking, right? Because just the current situation is not working. We create a whole new situation. Well, it might work, it might not work, because we don't know how the dynamics of societal conduct and economic conduct are going to unfold within this new scenario. But what I think is important oftentimes is to find a structural approach to those problems. Capitalism in itself is not bad. It just reveals underlying traits of human nature, because it is so detached from control and the wish to kind of create the best system through own proactive thinking and distribution of wealth. Money is just there, and whatever happens within the society through economic conduct is actually not money's fault, but our fault, because our nature just does not allow for us to be efficient. To be more specific, if you, as somebody who has massive wealth, have the opportunity to kind of reinvest it and then grow exponentially because you have more productive capital, and then later on, if you think about modern terms, right, invested in financial assets and then gain even more wealth through the exponential growth of financial asset classes and financial returns, then you are going to do it. It is not the case that you're going to say, oh, well, this creates social injustice, I might not do it, right? Nobody's going to do that. If the system allows you to do something, humans not only tend to do it, but they are exploiting it each and every time. It's the classical example of the bank robber and the bank. The bank increases the security, improves the security system, and the robber, looks for new innovations to kind of rob the bank. So this is human nature. We always try to find, kind of the holes in the system and then exploit them. Because in the early days of capitalism, the idea and the system was evolving. Obviously, the holes were much greater than they are today. Today, the critique is still there because wealthy people exponentially benefit from the rules of capitalism. I mean, there are so wealthy people, they can just go to politicians and kind of say, I'm going to pull out all my productive capital from this country if you don't give me a tax break. And then I say, okay, well, there you go with your tax break. They enjoy legal advantages, informally, of course, but they do. They have great advantages because they can invest more money in the financial markets and get much higher returns. So I can understand when communists say, we don't want that, we want to prohibit these kind of things. But think about it this way. If capitalism is just improved, it would be much more efficient than to again reinstall a communist state where the human capital is not even sufficient enough to think about all the ways a society can develop into and then distribute the wealth over many years. I mean, if you just look back at the last 5 years, right, how much change we have experienced on this planet, socially, ideologically, economically, and even militarily, right? You cannot predict what's going to happen, and this makes your system extremely inefficient if you just want to react to the social injustice. But instead, we need to improve capitalism as a system itself. So, and I'm just going to give a last example before I'm diving into the solution, kind of. The last example would be, let's think about the global crisis, global financial crisis in 2008. Back then, we had the mortgage lending crisis because banks were giving out loans to, not creditworthy customers. It was basically all dependent on, kind of banks trying to find the holes in the system and exploiting them, right? All right, so this was in 2008. Now in 2020, when we had the corona crisis and general demand dropped to such low levels, that we would think that we have a systemic economic collapse. And later on with the inflation, like very recently, and we're still battling it on a global level, that we have rising inflation levels, while the interest rates are also increasing and slowing down productive investments. We would think that the banks that were just just more than a decade ago were so structurally badly positioned that it would happen again, that we would have lots of defaults of major banks. But it didn't happen. Why? Because from this crisis we learned that we needed to implement stricter rules and clearer rules of bank operations that would minimize the downward risk. And we managed to do that through the Basel frameworks. And currently they're actually working on the Basel IV framework. So my prediction is that the banks are going to be more secure over time, and we have ever decreasing risk of systemic failure on the sides of banks. Why? Because capitalism was improved at that point. It needed a crisis, yes, but it's not like whole economies collapsed or something like that. But we use that moment in history, in economic history, to extract maximum value, learn from it, and improve capitalism. For example, if we think in communist terms or in reactionary terms, I don't want to put too much pressure from the idea perspective on communism, but since it is reactive thinking. In the 2008 crisis, we could have thought in a completely different direction and say, okay, well, the system is not working and we are overhauling it and building a new system. We didn't know if that's going to be the solution to our problem. But improving it actually was, and it shows that banks are very strong throughout two major crises in the last 3 years. So I'm pretty confident that we have a very strong argument in favor of improving capitalism. And here, DEVLET, my book, comes in. based on the free market logic and free market dynamics, I extended those ideas and called it the Devletist economy. Everything that I discuss in this book is kind of, how can I say, improved with the word Devletist up front. And the idea of the Devletist economy is that yes, we have money, and yes, we have a free market mechanism and system, obviously, for the economy. But it is very, now the wording is very important. I don't want to say strictly regulated. It is very logically regulated. Because yes, we need the dynamic of, or the interplay of individual property rights and money, so we can outsource the efficiency. So money is moving to the points where it's utilized the most. For example, if we take a scientist and this person tries to develop something, he is going to save money or invest it into something that he can use in order to make his innovation work. So money is then at a point where it's utilized in the most efficient way. This wouldn't be possible in communism because the distribution of wealth is not according to where it's needed most or where the money naturally flows to efficiently, but rather, based on a very universal distribution mechanism. So it's not going to work, and this scientist might not be able to kind of develop his ideas and innovation. However, what I think is very important that politics needs to do is to create frameworks where demand is actually channeled into very useful things that brings us farther in our progression as societies. What do I mean by that? Today we have, for example, a much concentration of demand in entertainment businesses, right? So I'm talking about social media, sports and TV, gaming, whatever. So naturally, because the demand is within those sectors quite high, we tend to neglect more important stuff such as archaeology, humanities, or also biology, chemistry, natural sciences. Why is that? Because when you get more money, right, by just engaging with very superficial stuff, something that I'm bringing up all the time, then obviously people kind of try to specialize in those sectors, right? Why do they do that? Because in the current political system or in the current capitalist setup, people still exponentially are favored. People with money are exponentially favored and have the opportunity to develop themselves and realize themselves once they have money. But what happens is that the economic output of a society becomes worse in quality. So we have a bunch of superficial and unnecessary stuff. I'm just giving the most simple example. If you open up an e-commerce shop, right, selling just some sort of product, I don't know, fidget spinners or something like that, any product that does not, or telephone cases, any product that does not enhance society, but you make a lot of money out of it, people obviously are dragged into those sectors, but neglect other sectors which actually would advance society, such as physics, chemistry, art, or humanities, history, archaeology, you name it, right? These are very important aspects of societal life, but because nobody's willing to pay for those services and the findings of those sectors, they are going to die. Or at least lowering the output, so we cannot advance. So they're pretty much dependent on public funding, etc., etc. So what in a Devletist economy happens is that in principle the demand is redirected, and how you do that is not just by setting incentives. Obviously you do that through the education system, because people, when they are more directed towards not making money, but to developing themselves, obviously they're going to seek ways of doing this also within the economy. And On the other side, you also need to have rules and regulations that, exactly as we did, as we just talked about in the banking sector, reduce downside risk, meaning that the labor laws need to be much more streamlined. They need to be much more restrictive on the side of in terms of exploitation, but also you need to make minimum quotas of reinvestment of capital for firms, so that firms cannot just put up massive winning margins and then not reinvest it into innovative stuff. So the economy itself should reinvest in innovation and research and development. And you can make a simple rule. You can say 20% of company earnings and revenue need to go back into research and development, right? And you're not distributing wealth proactively, but you're just giving the companies the chance to proactively seek by themselves to look elsewhere for innovative investments, and not just for capital returns. And all of a sudden, you create the demand by just setting up a very simple rule without kind of taking away from anyone and redistributing it to some point where you don't know if it's going to be productive or not. So the Devletist economy actually is an economy that has very clear rules and regulations that reduce kind of the inefficient use of money, while also securing some sort of or making a very efficient risk minimization. On the other hand, it creates demand for services and products and all sorts of economic conduct where society can progress. In the current situation, as I said, the focus is pretty much based on where can I get the most monetary benefit from my economic conduct, right? But the focus should really be where can we have the most innovative potential, because then society progresses and then you have also more sustained or sustainable popular demand for your products and services, right? At one point, telephone cases are not going to be relevant anymore. The winning margins drop and you have to look for another product to kind of put on the market. But if you have technology or other scientific fields where companies redirect their capital to, you create continued demand because the level or the cognitive level of the society is increasing. So it's kind of an interplay between having economic success and societal success, where I have to say the main message in this book is the economic success is not a success in itself, but rather a means to gain societal progress and advance collectively. This is just kind of the, the short summary or a very, very brief sketch of what the Devletist economy is about. I aim to dive deeper into this topic in another episode, of course, because there's much more to it, and it's a very interesting approach, I think, because capitalism and the critique is obvious nowadays. People, are very sometimes a bit too heavy on capitalism, but it's really just our nature that moves along, the structural setup of rules and regulations in any sense, not just in the economic realm. So I hope you could take away something from this. As I said, book recommendation, DEVLET. Links are in the description. And then I hope to, again, I almost did it again. No, I don't hope to, I also hope to see and hear from you. But I also hope to see you back, for another episode of SC Podcast. Thank you very much. Take care and bye.